Welcome back to the Pleasuring Shed, everybody, and welcome to part 4 of our rod restoration. So we know we've already done the butt section, so new cork handle, new reel seat, new butt ring, and loads of new whipping, and we've put one coat of just sealing varnish on it, just a water-based outdoor varnish, which I always use for my floats and for anything else, and that just bonds and seals all the whipping. So that's where we are with that. So if you've watched all of the videos up to this point, first of all, thank you very much for staying the course. It's been a long journey, but we're moving on. We're cracking on quite nicely. So now we're going to move on to the midsection and the tip section. And this is actually really quite a simple process. All we're going to need to do, first of all, is strip down everything off it. So we're taking all of the eyes off, all of the whipping off, and then scraping back all of the varnish. So just like we did on the butt section of the rod, we're going to repeat that process just here on these two midsections and tip sections. So that's it. So I'm going to crack on with that. But before I do, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who has liked and given me a thumbs up and subscribed and left so many positive comments. I do try and read them all and hopefully try and reply to them all, but they do mean so much. They're really humbling that people take their time to comment on something that I'm doing, which is, you know, it's just me in my shed. As I say, I've said it before in the other films, I'm not a professional. I'm just doing things the way I want to do it and taking you along for the ride. So I hope you stick with me, and we'll get cracking on with these different sections of rod. So yeah, let's not hesitate. Let's get straight into it. So I'm going to tackle the midsection of the rod first of all. As we said before in the previous videos, that the cane is in really good condition, but it's just caked in horrible varnish. The whippings have been done and repaired, looks like several times before. So the first thing we're going to do is just start stripping it back. So literally, I've got an old scalpel blade, not a particularly sharp one. This one doesn't have to be sharp for taking the whipping off, but it does need to be sharp when you're reapplying the whipping. So I'm just going to start at the ferrule end. Got a nice brass ferrule there, which we'll clean up in a moment. But just going to start off just by scraping off some of the old threads. So I hope you can see this on the camera. I'm not being particularly gentle. I'm just ripping things off as we go round. There we are. This is going to take quite a while, I think, and we're beginning to see the ferrule legs, if you like. It's like spider's legs underneath. So that means we're almost down to where we want to be. Looks like this has had some work on it at some point. They're all a bit bent and twisted. Sorry about my clock. Gotta love my clock. I restored that clock back to working condition. I'm really pleased about that. Let's keep good time. So there we are. So that's all the whipping off there. We'll address the bent bits. There's a bit of a sharp bit there as well. We'll address that a little bit later. We'll just carry on removing the whipping. Now I don't want to slice when I'm taking this little bits of whipping off here on the side here. I don't want to slice into the whipping because that means I'll cut into the cane. I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to lay the knife down flat and kind of using the point of the knife, trying to just dig in underneath the thread. But again, not pressing too hard because I don't want to dig into the cane. There we are. Cut through that one already. And just peeling it off. There we are. And then the next one. Really doesn't take much time at all, but it is quite an enjoyable part of it because what you do begin to see is you begin to see the colour of the original cane underneath, and that's really quite exciting. Okay, so now we've moved down to one of the eyes. I don't know if the camera picks this up, but the eyes are quite where are we? There we are. They're quite manky. And a little bit rotten, a little bit rusty. And as you can see, the whipping here is not in particularly good condition. So I'm going to completely remove those. I'm getting rid of the eyes. I've got some nice new ones to go on there. So let's get those off. Again, I'm not cutting into the cane. I'm trying to get the blade along the edge of the foot of the eyelet there. Just going to peel that back, and you'll see the foot underneath. You can see I didn't cut into the cane. There we are, it's one side released. And then just using your fingers, peeling off the rest of the cane. That's nice when you get a bit of thread and you can pull. It just keeps unwinding. All right, that's one eye out. I'll just remove the rest of that thread. Obviously be careful with the blade, as it is quite sharp. Let's get the other side off. Now, this is going to be, like I say, a long process. And what I'll do then as well, once all the threads are off, all the whippings off, what I'm going to do then is use the side of the blade itself, but the edge of the blade, rather than cutting into the wood, I'm going to scrape back. So I'm hoping you can see this on the camera. So just using the side of the blade to scrape back, and you can see that old varnish just flaking away. So that's what I'm going to do with the whole rod, or the whole of this section of the rod. Removing all the whipping and all that varnish. So I'm going to carry on doing that. You don't need to see the whole process. You get an idea of what I'm doing, and then I'll come back to you once that whole midsection has been cleaned. All right, so join me in a minute. So one thing I forgot to mention when we were stripping things back is to remember the position of your rod rings. And if there was any decorative whipping on there, then try and remember where that was as well, so it can go back in the same place. Of course, you can add as much whipping or as little whipping as you want on your rod. Remember, it's your rod if you're restoring one. I'm going to try and replace it pretty much as it was. But of course, I've got to remember the position of things. So if we just take a look under this camera here, we can see that there are lighter shades where the cane has kind of faded over time. You can see the marks left behind. I'll mark them with a pencil as well. And that's what we want to do. We want to mark it with a pencil. Excuse me. And here we can see where the original rod ring sat. You can see these sort of stain marks. That's sort of where the ring had rusted slightly and it stained the cane slightly. So that's a good reference point. So when we apply the new ring, which is in the box here, it says, there it is. So when we apply the new ring, we can place it straight back pretty much into its original position. We can then work out either side of that how much whipping we want and how decorative we want that whipping to be. But it's important that it goes back in the same place, so that helps with the curvature of the rod when you're playing your fish and gives it a lovely through action, as they say. So I've just marked all that, and I'm going to continue stripping. And as I go along the rod, I'll continue to mark where the rest of the rings are and any other decorative whipping. So yeah, don't forget that. It's a really important part. So I'm just coming to the end of the midsection. I'm just going to remove the last bit of thread off of the ferrule. That's always a bit tricky because we catch the legs underneath if you're not careful. So be careful with that. And a right old mess here. I need to have a bit of a tidy up. Yeah. Another little bit of thread there. I think. Yeah, there we go. I love it when you get one of those. There we are. We're done. Right. That's it. That is the midsection completely stripped. Scrape back all the varnish. You can still feel a few rough spots on it. So my next job is to give that a good old sand. Now remember, when you're sanding it, you're going to have to remember your pencil marks. So yeah, just be careful and make sure you remember where they are. Once we've sanded it, we're then going to give the brass ferrules at either end a bit of a treatment with some brasso and just tidy up those legs, because I don't know if you can hear it. It's a little bit sharp there, so we're going to clean that up. Yeah, and then we should be good to go to start putting everything back together again. And then once that's done, we repeat the whole section again for the tip section. So let's crack on. So there we are. I have just sanded down the whole of the midsection, and while you were away, I also stripped down the tip section as well. I figured that you didn't really want to see all that. It's exactly the same process as doing it on the middle section of the rod. So there we are. So now both sections now are completely stripped. They've both been sanded down, and all of the markings are there ready to be re-whipped. But before we do that, because I'm going to be whipping onto the ferrules, what I want to do is just give those ferrules a really good clean with a bit of brasso. Got one on each end. They're a bit tarnished and a bit dark and blackened, so a nice bit of a polish will bring them up lovely. So I've got my tin of brasso ready. I've got an old cloth ready. What I just want to address here, first of all, is one of the legs of the ferrules has got a bit bent and a bit snaggy. It's quite sharp, and if I just try and whip over that, it will probably just cut the thread, and I'll have to start all over again, and it will keep happening until I address it. So I'm just going to get myself a little pair of pliers. What should we do? These flat ones should do it. And I am just going to pull that out, try and straighten it, and get that to lay down nice and flat. That's much better. And it's not perfect, but it's not sharp anymore. I'm not catching my skin on it as I run my finger over it. And once they start binding on that with the whipping, that will sit down quite nicely. So what I'm going to do is just put a bit of tape around that while I'm polishing it. So just a piece of ordinary masking tape should do. Just ordinary common or garden masking tape. And that will just stop me catching it with the cloth when I am polishing it. It also protects the wood a little bit as well. So there we are. Save that bit for the other end. And then it's a case of using some brasso, good old brasso. I prefer to use the cloth, this sort of felty paddy stuff, rather than the polish, like a bottle of liquid polish. I think this stuff works quite well. It's the cotton wool or whatever it is, the gauze, whatever you want to call it, is quite abrasive, certainly abrasive enough for cleaning what we're cleaning. So let's take a look at that on the map. So you can see the original condition is all darkened and marked. So here we go. Let's see what happens. Just rubbing it. That's all you got to do. Just rub it backwards and forwards. Don't be afraid to, a bit of elbow grease, as it were. And it can take a little while to do this. It doesn't all come off instantly. Sometimes you sort of put it all on and then wipe it all off, polish it off with a clean, dry cloth. And then you'll have to go over it again. But with a bit of time, a bit of patience and a bit of effort, it will come up looking nice and shiny. Here we are. I think you will agree that is looking 100% better. There's a little bit more work to do on that, but I'm happy for that for now. So yeah, so let's crack on with the other end. So you know what I'm doing. Again, I'm sure you don't want to see me repeating it every single time and every single thing. So I'm going to give this one a good old clean up with the brasso, and I'll get back to you in a minute. Okay, there we are. So I've finished polishing up the brass, and I think if you take a look, I've done the tip section and the midsection. I think if you can see that there, I think that looks 100% better than it did. Yeah, so I'm happy with that. So my next job is to remove the masking tape, and then we can start rebuilding. But before I want to do any of that, I'm going to go and wash my hands because I've got black marks all over there, and I don't want to put all that dirt onto the cane itself when I start whipping, or onto the thread as well as I'm holding it and running it through my fingers. So I'm going to go and wash my hands, have a tidy up, and then we'll be ready to start the whipping. So we've had a good tidy up. My hands are clean. Wash them off with washing up liquid. Don't be afraid to wear rubber gloves if you need to. You know, if you don't like getting your fingers dirty or anything like that, a pair of those old, sort of surgeon type rubber gloves, they're great. They keep your hands nice and clean. But as I say, a bit of washing up liquid and it soon comes off. Nice clean hands again. Let's get straight into the whipping. Now, I've already whipped the butt section of the rod, as you saw in my previous videos, I hope. And we've gone for that nice dark green whipping. If I hold that up to the camera there, you can just see that. We've got a nice dark green whipping on there. So I'm going to stick with that because it would be weird to have different colour whipping on each section. But don't forget, it's your rod. If you choose to restore your own rod or rebuild a rod, be as imaginative and as colourful as you want. But I'm going to stick with the green. A few tools, sharp knife. So a scalpel blade there. Something really sharp, pair of sharp scissors, and your thread. So like I say, I've gone for that dark green colour. Now when we did the video part 3, I think, when we were whipping the butt section of the rod, I covered lots of the whipping on there. So if you haven't seen that yet, please go and give it a quick view, and it will help you understand some of the whipping that we're going to do on here. I will take you through some of the basics, but I'm not going to take you through every single bit of whipping that I do. I'm going to show you some basics and then skip on and just show you the important bits, if you like, or what I think are the important bits. And then hopefully at the end you'll have a better idea of how to do it yourself. That's the idea of this. So, right, without further ado, let's get cracking and let's get on to this first part of the whipping. Now, I'm going to start with the bottom ferrule. So that's the fattest of the ferrules that we've done so far. Now, normally when you're whipping, you should always whip uphill. But on this occasion, because of the way the feet or the legs of that ferrule are, I'm going to whip downhill, which is a little bit awkward, but that's the way I'm going to start. And the reason for that is if we look at the desk camera, we can see these feet here. And what I want to do is, as the thread is moving down the legs, let's call them the legs, as the thread is moving down the legs, I want that thread to really pinch down those legs and hold them in place. So I'm going to start whipping that way. I'm going to use this line here. As you can see, there's a lip there. Feel my thumb against it. So I'm going to use that as my starting point, and I'm going to whip down onto the split cane there. So, first of all, on this particular whipping, we don't need any tape or any glue or anything like that. We're going to start just by pinching the thread in place. Let's just make sure we're nicely lined up. This is a little bit awkward trying to do it to camera, but I will do my best. So what I've done is I've just clamped the piece of thread underneath my thumb, and then with the other end of the thread, I'm just going to start wrapping and going right round the back. And then I'm going to cross over the thread that I've already laid down, and I'm going to repeat that. And so what I'm doing effectively is squashing down that little tag end. And once you've squashed that down 2 or 3 times, it ain't coming off. As long as you keep the tension on the thread. And this is the really important part. Whatever you do, don't let go. Once you've started, you're kind of committed to finishing. So yeah, make sure that you haven't got any urgent business to attend to. You're not desperate for the toilet or anything like that, because, well, as I say, once you start, kind of committed to finishing. So I've got a few wraps on there now. So what I want to do is put my finger to hold it in place, and then I can let go of the thread, but not let go of the tension on my little finger there on the thread. So what I'm going to do is snip off this tag end. So take your sharp knife and just snip off that tag end. Again, it doesn't have to be particularly neat because we're going to whip over the top of it anyway. There we are. The thread, and then we continue whipping, and that's all we're going to do is just continue whipping all the way down these feet. Now it's important, because you're whipping downhill, the thread's going to want to come away, so you just got to keep using your thumbnail and just pushing it back up again, and that will keep it all bunched up and nice and neat. I'm sure there are easier ways of doing it, and there'll be rod builders out there now. And why are you doing it like that? Well, because it works for me. So I'm going to continue doing it. So what I'm going to do is go quiet, and I'm going to carry on, and then hopefully through the magic of television we'll be able to speed this bit up. Okay, so now I'm at the point where I want to finish the whipping. Now I'm sure that was quicker for you than it was for me. So what I need to do is find my little loop of fishing line, which I've got here. Hopefully the camera can see it. I can barely see it sometimes. So I've got my little loop of fishing line. And what I'm going to do, I've clamped it under my finger so I can let go of the thread. I'm going to pass this fishing line loop under my thread, and then just tuck it again under my finger so it can't go anywhere. So the thread is now going over the top of that fishing line loop, and I'm going to continue to add a few more turns. I'm going to say 4 more turns. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, I'm going to clamp it. Now with my scissors, cut off, but leaving a tag end. So a few inches, just enough to work with. And that tag end is going to pass through the loop. You've seen me do this before, through the loop, and then pulling on the other end of the fishing line loop will sit, pull it through underneath the threads and pull it tight. Put your loop away somewhere safe, because when you put it down, don't put it somewhere safe, you never blooming find it again. So make sure that's all tucked up nice and neat. And there we are. Now the last job is to just snip off the tag end. So using your really sharp knife, just lay the blade flat and slide it across. And there we are. That's done. So that's the first bit of whipping done so far. Now you'll notice that I've put in a sort of a spiral whip, and the reason I've done that is so that it matches the butt section. So if I bring that in, you can see there that we've got a similar whipping design. So yeah, so there we go. So a little bit of consistency through the rod and through the whipping, just for neatness. Again, it's just my choice. It's not perfect. It's not exactly, millimeter perfect, but it's close enough for me. Right. So let's move on to the next important whipping. So for me, the next important whipping is to whip on one of the eyes. So I'll show you it under the other camera because it will be easier. Just stand up to make sure it's in view. So there we are. So this is the first eye that we're going to whip onto the midsection of the rod. Now remember that the eyes generally decrease in size as you get closer to the rod tip. So when you're working out where to place your eyes, remember that look at the size of the eyes and they go down in scale as you get closer to the tip. So this is the larger of the 3 eyes that we're going to whip onto this section of the rod. The other thing to think about when you're whipping on the eyes as well, I'm going to put my glasses on so I can actually see this, is the foot of the eye. At the very end there, we want to make sure that that foot there has been flattened down and sanded off, so it's got a really nice tapered edge to it. What we don't want is a sudden lip. Perhaps if I turn it to its side, it's easier to see. You see it's very fine, almost like a like a sharp edge just there on the tips. And what that does as you're whipping up it allows the thread to rise quite nicely up onto the foot. So remember, when you're whipping on an eye, we want to be whipping up the eye, up the foot towards the center of the eye, if that makes sense. You'll see it as I do it. So with the ferrule end, we whip down, which is not the usual way of doing things. And remember, you always want to try and whip uphill, not downhill, but we do have an exception for that ferrule because of the way the legs are. So when you're whipping on an eye, remember to whip on from the up the eye. Yeah, that's what I mean. I know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to secure it in place with a little bit of tape. Now, if you remember, we marked on the rod where the bits of whipping were going to go, and you could see the rust marks that stained the cane. So we're going to make sure that the eye goes back in the same place. So I've got a little bit of thin masking tape, and I'm just going to hold that in place on one side and secure it there. That's it. Just wrap it round. And all this is to secure it in place while we whip it on. It's not going to secure the eye at all. I'm going to be removing the tape, but all it does is hold it there in place and make sure that it's nice and central. I don't need to glue the eye to the cane itself. The whipping will be strong enough to hold that in place. So I'm going to put another bit of tape on the other side, but this time, if you look, I need to make sure that I put it right up towards the eye itself and leave the beginning of the foot clear, because I'm going to be whipping up onto that foot. And when I get onto the foot a little bit more and started to secure it in place, I can remove this bit of tape. But what that tape does is just holds the eye, the foot of the eye, down firmly against the cane, so that when I start to whip, the thread will rise quite nicely. Okay, let's get some thread. So I'm now ready to start whipping the thread onto the eye. But what I want to do is just put some marks down as to where I want the band of whipping thread to start and finish. So if I take a center line from the center of the ring, put my ruler either side, and I'm going to have 1 centimeter of whipping thread from the base of the foot. So the base of the foot is there. So 1 centimeter from there is just there. So I'll put a line there. And then I'm going to do the same thing. So from the base of the foot, do 1 centimeter there as well. So you can see that I'm going to start my whipping from this end and whip up onto the foot, and then eventually I'll continue that whipping right up to the base of the eye. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I've taped the thread to the cane, and then from there I'm just going to put a few wraps around. And what that does is it allows me to give a bit of tension. So there's my mark. So that's where I want my whipping to start from. So using my finger and pulling the thread tight, going to start my whipping from there. I'm really keeping quite a bit of tension on the thread. Now we get back to where we started, and what I want to do is just cross over the thread that I've laid down, if that makes sense, and then continue round, and I'm going to cross over it again, and I'm going to cross over that 3 or 4 times. That's 3. Again, keeping quite a tight bit of pressure on there. There's 4. Let's go around one more time. We've crossed it 4 times. Now I'm going to clamp it under my finger and move this thread out of the way. I'm going to need my sharp blade again, and I'm just going to snip off this excess. Careful not to cut the thread that you've already laid down. There we are. Don't press too hard because you don't want to cut into the cane. But it won't be seen. It will be underneath the whipping. Now that can be removed now. We don't need that bit at all. But I'm going to leave that bit of tape there because it's going to give me a clue to what I need to do later on. So back into turning the rod and making sure that all that whipping is bunched up nice and tight. It's just a case of turning, whipping it on. So again, I'm going to go quiet. Let the magic of television do the work. So, I don't know if you can hear, but it's absolutely chucking it down with rain outside. So I'm sorry about the background noise if you can hear it rattling on my roof. But we have reached the foot of the eyelet there. So we're going to continue to turn and continue up the foot. So this is again why it's important that when you are choosing your eyes that you file down the end of the foot so that it's nice and flat, nice and sharp, so the thread sits up on it and rises up on it really easily. If there's a bit of a step, the thread keeps slipping off it. It just makes it really awkward. Not impossible, just awkward. So yeah, just get a little needle file or a little bit of sandpaper and just take off the edge of that foot. So it's got a nice flattened, tapered edge. There we are. So we're sitting nicely up on that foot now. So it's really quite awkward doing it to camera. Keeping going. So I'm nicely up the foot now, and I'm quite confident that that is secure. So I'm going to just clamp it under my finger, and then I can remove this sticky tape. So the eye will stay there. We don't need that anymore. Remember, we still got this bit on here. This is there for a reason. I haven't forgotten about it. And now I'm just continue whipping. So I'm going to go quiet again. Okay, so I'm coming to the end of my whipping, and thank you, clock. I need to think about finishing that off now. So I need my fishing line loop. Now here's where this bit of tape comes in handy. So what it does is it reminds me which end to put the loop. So here's my loop. Because the tape is on the cane that end, I want my loop to go in that way. So when I pull the thread through, it pulls it through and underneath the threads that I've done. So it's a bit awkward, putting the thread underneath and clamping it in place. You need 6 pairs of hands sometimes when you're doing this. So that's the thread in the loop in place now. So I can let go of that as I'm grabbing hold of the thread again, and I can continue to rotate. Yeah, it's really important which way round you put your fishing line loop. If you put it the wrong way round, you'll pull your thread out the wrong way and it will look horrible. So keep on wrapping around as many times as you can. I want to get my thread right up to the base of the eye. So basically riding up the foot as far as I can, pushing that thread down just to enable me to get an extra couple of turns on, really. Making sure it's all nice and neat and bunched up neatly. And get 1 or 2 more turns on there. Get 1 more for luck. Yep, right, that's it. I'm not getting any more on there. So just make sure it's all nice and neat. There we are, we're back to the loop. So I'm clamping it. Now another little note to make here. Well, I should have said this when I was putting it on. I don't want the loop to be under the same flat edge of the cane as the eye is on, because there's a small gap just underneath that whipping there where it comes off the edge of the cane and onto the foot of the eye, and there's nothing under there, so it creates a little space. So if you put your loop underneath there, when you go to pull it through, it's really got nothing to bind on. So what I can do now is cut off the thread with scissors. So I've left that tag end, and that tag end is going to go through the loop like so. Pull it through. Where is it? Where's it gone? There we are. Pull it through, and then pull the other end of the loop through, and that pulls it underneath, and that's what secures it. Fishing line loop somewhere safe. Give it a little tug, and there we are. That's the first eye, or first half of the eye, whipped on. That's good. So now we just want to snip off that tag end, and we're done. So there we go. Happy with that? It's looking rather smart. So I'm going to repeat exactly the same process on the other side, bearing in mind that my bit of tape where I secure the line to is going to go at the other end. So I will secure my line this end, wrap it round to where my mark is, my 1 centimetre mark, and then beginning to whip up the foot. I can probably remove this piece of tape here now because that eye's not going anywhere. And remember, when you put your loop in, to put the loop end towards the tape that you are clamping the thread down with. I hope that makes sense. It's just copying the exact same process on either side, but again, obviously you're working different ends. So that's that. So I'm going to carry on doing that. I'm going to do some of the decorative bands and put the rest of the whipping on, and then maybe we'll work together to finish off the last ferrule. So I'll see you in a little while. So here we are. We have finished whipping on that eye, and I've also, if you can see that, let's hold it up a little bit closer to the camera. I've done some of the decorative bands as well, and I've added the next 2 eyes. So both eyes done in exactly the same way I whipped on the first one. So yeah, nice and simple. Nice simple whipping, nothing flash, nothing fancy, but really, really strong. The whipping and holding those eyes on is really strong. There's no danger of those eyes coming loose anytime soon. What I've also done, just to protect the whipping that's on here already, is that I've just given it a very, very thin coat of Rustin's Outdoor Clear Gloss Varnish. It's an exterior varnish, as I've used before. You've seen it all before. But I've just given that a really thin coat. I actually applied it with my fingertips, dipping my finger into the thing and just giving it a coat. So I'll show you how I did that in a minute. But the last thing we are going to do is just whip on this little bit of ferrule here. Just whip up the ferrule just to finish that off, and that's that whole section whipped then. So yeah, let's crack on with that. So I'm going to start the whipping using the same green thread, and I'm going to go over to our other camera. So what we want to do is just place the thread across there like so. And just like I do my floats, I'm going to start from there, and I'm going to wind round underneath, making sure I hold it in my nail, line underneath, and then I'm going to cross over the thread that I've already laid. I'm going to do that 3 or 4 times. And that clamps down that tag end of thread there. Because this is brass, it's quite slippery, so initially I want to put a little bit of pressure on it. Just keep bunching it up until we've gone over that tag end 4 or 5 times. So I really want it to hold in place quite securely. And like I say, when you're whipping downhill, it's a little bit fiddly. You just got to keep using your thumbnail just to bunch it all up again. Like I said on the other ferrule that we did when we whipped downhill, it's not the easiest way of doing it. And I'm sure there'll be people screaming at the screen right now telling me that I'm doing it wrong. But it works for me, and that's the way I'm doing it. So now we've got a good few wraps on there. I've clamped it under my finger. I need to take my sharp knife and just snip away that tag end. Being careful not to cut onto the threads that you've already laid down. Get rid of that tag end, don't need that anymore. And we are going to continue whipping. Now, as you already know, this is quite a long and laborious process. I really quite find it therapeutic, so I'm just going to go quiet again and let the magic of television take over. So I'll see you in a minute. Okay, so I'm at the stage now where I'm going to just slide underneath with the fishing line loop. Into position, clamp it under my finger, and I'm going to do 4 more turns. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we are. So now I need to cut off the end, leaving that little tag. You can see that, and that passes through the loop. I'm sure you know how to do this by now. Expert. And pull the loop through underneath. There we are. Let's pull that up nice and tight. And that, once I've snipped off this tag end, is that. Done. There we are. Let's bring that over to you. So there we are. It is done. And you can see that. Probably saw it better on the other camera. So yeah, so I'm happy with that. That's really good. So what I'm going to do now, before I do anything else, is just, on fingers and thumbs, I'm going to put a little bit of varnish on there now. So this is my Rustin's varnish. You can see that in the jar. I dispense it into these jars because it's easier than prizing lids off every time I want to use it. So I can use the tip of my finger. I only want the smallest amount, and actually it saves brushing. So let's do it under this camera. And I'm just going to use my finger to smear it on. Very, very light pressure. Just spreading the varnish on with my finger. You see it's this sort of white milky colour to begin with. Actually, it dries nice and clear. This is a gloss varnish, but I haven't quite decided on the final finish of the rod yet. I don't know whether I want a glossy finish or more of a satin finish. I'll admit I tend to go for a more satin finish. On most of my floats, well, all of my floats are finished with a satin. I would like a matte, but unfortunately I don't seem to be able to find a matte yacht varnish can only find a satin or a gloss. So if anybody out there knows where I could get my hands on a matte yacht varnish, I'd really appreciate it. Yeah, there's lots of varnishes out there, I'm sure, but when it comes to yacht varnish, I can only seem to find gloss or satin. So I tend to use the satin for my floats. I think gloss is just a bit garish. But that's just my opinion and my, you know, my prerogative or whatever, my choice. There we are. So just wipe the tip of your finger off. So that looks slightly darker at the moment, but it will lighten as it dries. You see that? So I'm going to put that to one side to dry. And then that section, apart from its final varnish, that middle section is done. So yeah, well happy with that. Now we need to move on to the tip section. The final piece of the jigsaw puzzle, or the fishing rod in this case, is our tip section. So we have completed it, so almost. So I didn't want to bore you with putting all of the eyes and the whipping on for the tip section as well. It's exactly the same process as the whipping for the butt section and the middle section. So I've taken the liberty of doing all of the whipping except for the eye, the final tip ring. Okay, so that's going to show you. So if I bring it over to this camera here, I can show you under this camera a little bit easier. So this is the eye that we're going to use. There it is. And that needs to fit on the end of the rod. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that the very tip of the rod here is small enough to go inside this little part of the ring here. I hope you can see that. Yeah, so ideally what will happen is this will fit over the top, and we've got to get it lined up with our other rings, so that will fit over the top. And then we use these funny legs that run down the side, and we're going to whip right over the top of those, and that's what's really going to hold it into place. But that is not going into the eye very, very far. So what I need to do is just shave a little bit off this tip here so that the eye slides up a little bit further. I want more of the blank, if you like, to go inside the body of the eye. I need it to come up to a sort of about here somewhere. So that's my next project, or my next job, is to just shave some of that down. I don't want to go mad. I don't want to take too much off. So a little bit at a time. So just sand away a little bit or scrape away a little bit, and then just keep offering it up. And it needs to be a nice snug fit. I'm not going to glue the tip in. I don't want to be doing that, but I do want it to be quite a nice snug fit. All right, so let's start sanding. So I've got a little bit of sandpaper here. Let's move the eye to one side so we can get covered in dust. I'm just literally going to start sanding away, slowly rotating the rod as I'm sanding. And I'm going to keep doing that until I've taken off enough of the thickness to be able to slide it up the blank. So I'll keep doing this. You can come back in a second, or I'll come back to you in a second once I've sorted that out. So this is going to be quite a long process. So yeah, give me a minute and I'll be back with you. I think that should be enough. So let's just offer it up. So we want to make sure that all of our eyes are in a line. So making sure that your tip ring goes on the same face of the cane as your main rings. So sliding that on. Whoops. That's a nice snug fit now. That's actually, I'm really happy with that. So I haven't taken off too much. You can see by the sawdust on the bench here that I'm not taking off loads, but it's just enough for that tip of the cane there just to really slide nicely. So we're up to probably about there on the tip ring internally. So if I just slide it off and offer it up, we're going up to about there. So yeah, so that's quite a big section of the blank that's gone inside the eyelet there. So that's good. Right, my next job is to just file down these little ends of the feet. So a bit like when we were putting on the rings, let's bring this round. yeah, when we were putting on the rings, we made sure that the foot of the ring was really nice and flat, had that little beveled edge, because we wanted the thread to ride up the foot nice and easily. But on the tip ring, I'll show the camera here, I hope you can see it. We've got these feet at the end here. Where are we? There we are. We've got these little feet at the end, and again, they've got quite a fat bottom. So what I'm going to do is just shave them off. I'm actually put them on my little belt sander and just very, very gently, because they're quite springy, very, very gently, just feather off that edge. You can see that, yeah, just feather off that little edge there. I've finished the sanding, so let's hold this up to the camera so hopefully you can see it a little bit better. I don't know if you can make out the ends of the little feet or legs of that tip ring, and you can see that I've filed them down, sanded them down, so they're nice and sharp, almost look like a pair of tweezers, don't they? So yeah, so I filed them down nice and flat so that the thread will rise up and sit on those feet nice and easily. Good. So that's that bit done. Let's attach it to the rod. So when I want to place the tip ring onto the tip section, I need to make sure that all of my eyes that are all lined up, and this one goes on in the same place, in the same direction. I don't want the rings facing down and my tip ring facing up. It's fairly logical and common sense. So just make sure that all of your eyes are in a line, and then add this to it, because if you do choose to glue it in place, then once it's glued and set, it's going to be very, very difficult to move again. So yeah, so we'll make sure that's all lined up. Like I say, common sense. But what is it they say? Common sense is not as common as we think it is. So they say. Right, so I said that I wasn't going to glue it, but you know what? I think I might just put a little dab of araldite on it, just to be sure. So I'm going to mix up some araldite, and I'm going to add the tiniest amount just to hold it in position while I whip it on, and it will just add a little bit of strength as well to that tip. Bear with me while I get my araldite and mix it all up. So a little tip for when you're mixing up araldite, I use a bit of sellotape, and I just put that straight down onto my workbench like that. See that? Just stuck it down to my workbench there, and I'm going to mix up the araldite here. So I'm using, it's not really araldite, I know araldite is a brand name, it's like Hoover, isn't it, and vacuum cleaner. So I'm using Gorilla's epoxy set in 5 minutes glue, and I want the tiniest amount. I really hardly need any at all. I'm very careful how I squeeze this out, because it does tend to come out quite quickly. A little bit of both. There we are, the tiniest amount, literally got a dribble on there. Put the cap back on so it doesn't all dry up. A little bit of bamboo skewer, and mix the two together. So putting it on the sellotape makes it really easy, because once I finish with it, I just peel the sellotape off and put it in the bin. And that's pretty much mixed up now. And now it's time to add a little bit of glue to the tip of the rod. Just the tiniest amount. Now I'm just going to put it on the tip, because what I'll do then, when I place the tip ring onto that, that's going to squish all the glue down. So I really don't want very much at all. It's probably too much as it is. So the next thing to do is, again, make sure your eyes are in the right way. And I am going to just place tip ring on there. Just giving you a little movement just to work the glue into place. Make sure that's all nicely lined up. Nice and firmly into position, and then with a bit of tissue I'm just going to wipe off the excess. Don't want any excess on there really. It's going to be covered with the thread, but I'm a bit fussy and I don't want any excess on there. So just making sure that it's all nice and secure. There we are, making sure that's lined up. Right, one last check on the line up. So I'm going to hold it up to the camera. You can see it, and I'm going to look straight down all of the eyes. And I can see, by looking through, I can see the tip ring. I know that's all nicely lined up. So I'm just going to leave that to set. It says sets in 5 minutes. So I'm going to leave that to set for 5 to 10 minutes, just to make sure it's nice and firm. And then I can begin the whipping. Glue's all set. It's time to start the final piece of whipping on this entire project. So this is the last bit of whipping. So I'm quite relieved that it's the last bit because it has been quite a long process. So let's get started. So I'm going to start by attaching the thread quite near the tip. And there's a reason for this, and you'll see why in a moment. So using a bit of my little bit of masking tape, I'm just going to attach the end of the thread just very crudely to the end, just to stop it from pulling off. And then I'm going to slowly rotate the thread down the cane. I've got a little mark here. I don't know if you can, if the camera picks it up, but that was where one of the decorative whips was. But I'm going to make this whole thing a bit of a decorative whipping. So that's my starting point. So from there, I'm going to start rotating. And I'm going to cross over the thread and just keep turning and crossing over the thread again. And then for a third time, I'll probably do 4 or 5 turns crossing over that first laid down thread. And that's what's going to clamp it in place. Very similar to the decorative whipping that we did. And whipping on the eyes for that matter. So I'm going to hold that in place, get my thread out of the way, and snip off a little bit there. Being careful not to cut the thread that you've already laid down. There we are. Now removing that excess bit. Now remember when we were doing the eyes, I kept my piece of masking tape on so that I knew which way to place my loop. Because if we get the loop run the wrong way, we pull the thread the wrong way, and it makes a bit of a mess. So I'm going to remember that the loop goes towards the eye. If that bit of masking tape falls off, the loop goes toward the eyes, towards the eye. So remember that for me, because I might be asking you later. So as you can see, it's quite a long way to whip. But guess what? See you in a minute. Okay, so we've come to the point where we are going to, for the final time, add our fishing line loop. So here it is. Place it underneath the thread. Remember, got it around the wrong way myself. I want the loop to go towards the eye. It's a bit awkward. So making sure we clamp it down. And then I'm going to continue over the top. So I'm going to whip right over the end of this silver piece there. And I'm going to take it as far as I can to give it as much strength as possible. Just keeping that thread bunched up nicely. Don't want to see any of the silver underneath if we can help it. So keeping it bunched up. A few more turns. I hope your camera's picking this up because I can't see what the camera's seeing at the moment. Oh, I don't want to have to do it all again. More turns, I think. And I'll neaten all that up. So that's quite snug on there now. And now we're going to snip off the rest of the thread. Where's my loop? It's trapped under my finger. Yeah. So now I'm going to pass the tag end through the loop, hopefully for the last time. It's a bit of tape that's in the way. And then pull it through and hope that it's a nice snug. Oh, would you believe it? Would you believe it? My fishing line loop has snapped. Has that got caught in there? No, I think that has. I think we're going to get away with that. Not to worry. We just need to tie ourselves another fishing line loop, unturn it a few times, and then just redo that last bit again. But I think that's going to hold. It's pulled it through slightly, so I'm just going to snip off that tag in there. Oh, right at the last minute. It's always the last bit, isn't it? Never mind. It's all good fun. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to unwind a bit and tie myself a new loop. Back in a second. So I've tied my new loop. I am back in business. Tied my new loop. Hope you can see that there against my hand. There we are. That's the new loop tied. So just pop that down on my knife. And remember, it's on my knife because I can never find the blooming things. So all is not lost. All is not lost. So all we need to do is just give that thread a little pull and it comes out. And we're just going to unwind it 4 or 5 times, the amount of times that we put the loop on. So there we are. We're going to clamp it again, and then we'll try the loop the second time. Remember, the loop goes towards the eye. It's all fingers and thumbs trying not to let go of the thread. Oh, it's a bit fiddly. You need, like I say, you need 6 pairs of hands. Even 3 pairs of hands. Anyway, so loop's back on-ish. I'm going to start to wind that thread round again. Again, going around 4 or 5 turns, as many as we can. It's a bit awkward now because I haven't got all that thread to pull on. I've only got the bit between my fingers. So it's a bit tougher. I'm going to keep that tightness on the thread. We're almost there. One more turn. How much thread have we got? Oh, I think I can get away with one more turn. Make sure that's all clamped down nicely. And then passing the tag end finally through the loop, last time and hopefully this time, and then pulling the loop through. And it didn't snap. Brilliant. Phew. Right, let's just pull that up nice and tight, check that it's all nice and neat before we go snipping anything off. There we are. And for the final time, whoops, we're going to snip off tag end. So very gently. And we're done. There we are. We have just finished the final whipping of our entire rod project. Wow. I am chuffed. All that remains for me to do now is, like we did before with the Rustin's clear varnish, is just to dip my finger in the pot and just smear the varnish over this last bit of thread. I'm going to do that right now before I knock it and undo it all, and I've got to start all over again. So that's my next project. So I'll get that done, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do after that and putting the rest of the varnish on, etc. So join me in a second. So that's it. The build has finished. We have completed all 3 sections of the canes, all 3 sections of the rod, and they've all come up really nice. I think if we just have a look on the desk cam I've shown you here, look, I think those pieces have come up really nicely. I really like the the way the green and the brass and the cane, that all, I think that really works nicely. But again, if that's just my choice, I think that looks really nice. I hope you do too. Remember, it's your rod. You can choose whatever whipping color you like, do whatever patterns and designs you like. It's all down to personal taste. So the next project, apart from, for this rod, is to put the varnish on, the final coat of varnish. And I think I've settled for satin varnish. I'm going to go for a satin finish rather than the gloss. Although gloss is kind of traditional, I do like a satin finish. Again, it's personal choice, absolutely personal choice. So I've been doing a little bit of research, having a look at a few forums online and things like that. And there's loads and loads of information out there and lots of opinions and things like that. But one thing that I found intriguing and interesting was applying the varnish with the finger. Now, you saw me doing it with the Rustin's clear water-based varnish, just for that bonding coat that we put over the whipping. But I'm also going to use that technique of just dipping my finger into the pot and smearing it across with my finger. The reasons being behind that is it doesn't leave a thick layer. The finger is able to spread it out a little bit more thinly. You apply it a little bit more thinner than you would do with a brush or a pad. Yeah, so I think that's the technique I'm going to use. Let's see if it works. I hope so. If it doesn't work, we can always go over it with the brush again afterwards. But that's what I'm going to try and do. So I'm going to get myself set up and see how we go. So I'm about ready to go, and I'm going to start with the butt section, because that's the bit we did first. So like I say, it's already had a full coat of the Rustin's clear varnish, but that was only just a bonding coat, just to seal on the thread and things like that. So now we're looking at our final coat, or final coats. We'll probably put on 2 or 3 coats of the varnish. So let's give it a try using this finger technique. So let's hold it over the camera here. And I'm literally going to dip my finger in. So I've got a tin of Rustin's yacht varnish. Got to be careful because I've already taken the lid off. The Rustin's yacht varnish, and you can see that's a satin finish. And let's give it a try. Plenty of tissues to hand, so we can wipe our fingers off quickly if we need to, making sure that there's no dust or anything on the cane. It's all nice and clean. Now, what I do want to be careful of is not to spread too much varnish onto the brass, so just avoid that if you can. So here we go. Here's the first little dip of the finger, and we're going to slowly start to spread the varnish across the whipping thread to begin with, trying to be as neat as I can. I want that varnish to go on really quite thinly, so I'm going to try and spread it as much as I can, as many different directions as I can, so the varnish goes right deep into the threads. I'm not overly concerned if it's slightly thinner in places, because we're going to be putting on several coats, but I want to try and get that covering as thin as possible, but definitely covered, if that makes sense. I do believe it's working quite nicely. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but it's certainly going on nice and easily, and I'm not getting the threat of runs or dribbles anywhere. Yeah, on there. Again, this is going to be a long process. I think that's working quite nicely. I'll be doing this for all 3 sections. I'll be letting that dry for a good 24 hours in between each coat. Try a bit more. Yeah, this is working quite nicely. Actually, it's giving quite a nice finish. Nice and smooth, not getting any brush strokes in it. And it's not going on too thick either. It's not, it's not bunching around the thread too much. Sometimes you get kind of a build up where it sits up next to the thread, but that's not happening. That's actually giving it quite a nice smooth finish. Yeah, very happy with that. So I'll be carrying on with the rest of the rod. It's going to take me quite a while at this pace. I'm going to be doing all 3 sections like this. So as you can imagine, it's going to take me quite a while. Let's get rid of these for a moment. Don't forget you've got varnish on your finger. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do all 3 sections and then let it dry for 24 hours. And then I'll come back to you and report to you what the finish is like. And then whether we're going to put on, how many more coats we're going to put on. Probably 2, minimum 2, possibly 3 or even 4. But I would imagine 3 would be plenty. So yeah, see how we get on. So I'll see you in 24 hours. But for you, it will be just a few seconds. We have reached a rather momentous occasion. We have finished. Varnishing is done. It's taken me a good week to varnish the rod, to put a layer on using my finger, put a layer on, let that dry, put another layer on, let that dry, put another layer. I think I put 4 coats on altogether, but I did need to use a brush, not for the main painting of it, but just bring up the butt section here, just to get in that little gap there under the eye. I didn't want to leave that without varnish. So here we are. Here is the finished section of the rod. Here's my clock, and perfectly timed. So yeah, so here is the finished butt section of the rod. You've seen this kind of unvarnished, but now it's varnished, and you can see it's dried off and it's got that lovely satin finish to it. You see it in the light there. We've got the Medway written there, and I've put black bottom floats 2024 on there as well. I hope the camera's picking that up. There we are. So yeah, so that's the butt section. Then we've got the middle section. You've seen most of this before, but just showing you with the final coat of varnishing on. And as you can see, it's got that lovely satin sheen to it. I didn't want to go with the gloss. I know lots of you like a nice shiny rod, but it's not my taste personally. So there we are, nice new shiny rings, nice new whipping. I think you'll agree, well at least I hope you'll agree, it looks a lot better. And here is the final tip section. It's really hard showing showing a fishing rod rather to a camera. It's really quite awkward. So yeah, I haven't got the right lenses or anything like that. It's just an old phone that I'm using. And then right down to the eye, and you can see they've got an agate tip to the eye there. So the tip ring and the butt ring have both got agate eyes, and the rest are just plain stainless steel, I guess they are. So that's it, the rod is done. There we go. So there is only one thing left to do on this rod, and it's possibly one of the most satisfying things to do on a new fishing rod. So we put this lovely new cork handle on, but this is such a satisfying feeling when you take off the plastic coat. It's off. Put that in the bin, and you get to feel for the first time the lovely, soft, smooth cork handle. Yeah, oh, that feels great. I've got another little bit of plastic to take off there, but I'll do that in a minute. But that just feels lovely. I cannot wait to get this out on the bank. So what reel are we going to use with it? Well, I think out of my personal collection of reels, there is only one. And let's show you what I'm going to use. Let's just flip over to the other camera for a second. So there is only one reel really that can go with this rod. Here it is. It should be shafts of light coming out from the box and a choral angel choir sounding. There we are. So I guess you've already worked out what it is. This is my J.W. Young's Purist 2. It wasn't a new reel. It was secondhand when I bought it, but it's in very good condition, and yeah, I'm extremely happy with it. So I think that is going to look stunning on the new rod, or on the restored rod. What do you think? Should we take a look? Just doing up the screw on the reel seat, our nice new reel seat, and there we are. Here it is. And I think I like it. And I hope you'll agree with me that that looks pretty blooming special. It feels like a new rod. It looks like a new rod. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with the outcome. So there we are. We have reached the end of our epic journey restoring this rod. Is it a rod restoration or a rod rebuild or a rod refurbish? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. But what we have done is we've saved a battered old rod that would probably have ended up in a skip somewhere in landfill, and we've given it a fighting chance to get back on the bank and to get a bend in it and catch a few more fish. And hopefully this rod will last for another 50 or 60 years. So that was the aim of the project, really, was to save the rod. Now, the other aim of the project, of course, was to encourage you guys at home to have a go yourself. Please try. You know, these things are not impossible. You've seen me do it. You've seen the tools that I use. There's nothing fancy. There's nothing expensive or highly technical in any of the things or tools that I use or skills that I have. It's just a bit of practice, a bit of repetitive practice, doing it again and again. You're going to make mistakes, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. So if you take anything from this film, please take away from it that you can have a go yourself. And I really strongly encourage you to do so. You know, it's great fun. It's very therapeutic. It's just you and your rod and your whipping and yeah, it's very relaxing, very calming. Yeah. So please have a go. Have a go. Well, look, there we are. That's the end of the film. All I want to do now is put a bend in this rod. And as much as I would love to have added that part of the film to this video, one, I haven't filmed it yet. And two, the film's already going to be quite long. So we'll have to do a part 5. Can't believe we're having 5 parts of this rod restoration project. So join me in part 5. And we will hopefully, fingers crossed, get a nice traditional style float on it with some traditional baits and get a nice bend in the rod and pull it through its paces. So that's it. Tight lines, everybody. Stay safe. See you all soon.